Hello everyone. So I've created this video to kind of talk you through paper 3, which is only for higher level students of the IB Economics Syllabus that begins in May 2022. So you are allowed a total of 1 hour and 45 minutes for paper 3, and the maximum number of marks for this paper is 60 marks. There are 2 compulsory questions. So this is the only paper where you actually don't have choices. You have to answer both questions. Each question is obviously worth 30 marks if the total paper is worth 60. And you are advised, I'm advising you to spend about 50 minutes on each question. And that leaves 5 minutes at the very end for you to review. So each question will be subdivided into 2 parts. There's a part A, which contains a lot of sub-questions. Part A will be a total of 20 marks. So I'm advising you to spend about 30 minutes of your 50 minutes. So you have a total of 50 minutes for each question. Spend 30 minutes on part A. Part B is an extended response sort of policy recommendation question. It's worth 10 marks. So I advise you to spend about 20 minutes on part B. Now, once again, part A, total 20 marks, and spend about 30 minutes on part A. It will include a lot of sub-questions, about 7 or 8 sub-questions where you might be asked to write definitions of key terms, like define so-and-so. Maybe write a short explanation. A question that requires a short explanation. Maybe a 4-mark question where you have to draw a diagram and explain that diagram and use it to illustrate a concept. And there will definitely be lots of calculation questions, okay? Calculate so-and-so, calculate so-and-so. You are allowed a calculator for this paper. Okay, so remember that you are allowed a calculator for this paper. So this is part A. About 7 or 8 sub-questions. You may be asked to define key terms, write short explanations, illustrate a concept by drawing a diagram and explaining the diagram, or performing calculations. Now, part B is where things get really interesting. This is actually the part of paper 3 that I like the most. So part B is a policy recommendation. As I said, this is worth 10 marks alone. It's an essay, an extended response, and you should spend about 20 minutes responding to part B. It will look something like this. Using the data provided and your knowledge of economics. So throughout part A, you are calculating and you are responding to data provided. Using that data and your calculations, as well as your knowledge of economics, recommend a policy which the so-and-so, say Australian government, could introduce to so-and-so. Maybe reduce consumption of cigarettes, or encourage people to go and get vaccines, whatever. Okay, you are basically going to step into the shoes of an economist who is advising the government using the data provided and your knowledge of economics. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to talk to you about how you structure your question and what you should do to basically access the higher mark bands in this question. So this is what the mark bands look like for the highest level. So a 9 out of 10. This is a level 5. So to access level 5, to get either a 9 or a 10 out of 10, all right, your response needs to identify and fully explain an appropriate policy. So the policy needs to be appropriate. It needs to be relevant. Okay, the response uses relevant economic theory effectively. So you've used the relevant theory effectively to support your policy recommendation. All right. Throughout your response, relevant economic terms are used appropriately throughout the response. So you are advised to define all relevant economic terms, especially terms that you may have not defined in the sub-questions in part A. Okay, so define relevant key terms and use them appropriately throughout the response. The use of information from the text and data is appropriate, relevant, and supports the analysis and evaluation effectively. Make sure you use information from the texts provided or any data provided. Use this information or data appropriately and relevantly, so you need to select the relevant data. And the goal is to use this data information to support your analysis and your evaluation. Okay, don't just quote data. Make sure you provide analysis of this data. So maybe you can quote the data, analyze the data, use it to construct an argument, and then balance it with a counter argument. And the last thing I would recommend is that the response contains evidence of effective and balanced synthesis or evaluation. Make sure your evaluation and your synthesis is effective. This is number one, but also balanced. So say, for example, you're going to quote, so you're taking a quote from the information or the data. Make sure you provide analysis of this information and data. Use it to construct an argument. Now, to ensure that you are balanced in your evaluation, you can use the word, however, on the other hand, and then provide a counter argument. Okay, this argument and counter argument framework is what we call evaluation. So say, for example, you're going to take a quote from the information or the data provided, and then you're going to analyze it, explain the relevance of this information and data. Your argument could maybe, if you start talking about the short-term effects, then your counter argument, you would balance it with discussing the long-term effects. If you're going to talk about the stakeholders that gain from this policy, you can balance it with the stakeholders that lose from this policy. If you're going to talk about the pros or the advantages of this policy, you can balance it with the cons. If you're going to talk about, say, the assumptions on which this policy recommendation is based, you can balance it with the limitations, a discussion of the limitations of those assumptions. So make sure whenever you provide an argument that you balance it with a counter argument. So short term is balanced with long term, stakeholders gaining is balanced with stakeholders losing, pros or advantages is balanced with cons or disadvantages, and any discussion of the assumptions is balanced with a discussion of the limitations of those assumptions. So if you do all of that, if you identify and fully explain an appropriate policy, define relevant key terms and use them effectively to support your recommendation, explain relevant economic theory and use it effectively to support the recommendation, use information from the text and data appropriately, relevantly, and to support your analysis and evaluation. And if your response contains evidence of effective and balanced synthesis or evaluation, you will access level 5, which is 9 or 10 marks out of 10. Remember, you are spending about 20 minutes on part B. Okay, I hope you found this useful. Please contact me if you have any questions, and good luck.